to order. At this time, we have time for rebuttal from the City of Burien. Board members wishing additional information may ask questions at this time, and we'll let the city decide how they want to best handle questions. They have had a list of the questions that we asked them last night, and I believe there is a representative here from Burien Associates that has been requested. So, Mr. Martin.
Hello again, Mike Martin, Burien City Manager, 400 Southwest 152nd Street, Burien. Thank you for having us back. We would like to start by responding to the list of questions that we concluded last night's proceedings with. To that end, we'd like to address them thematically, and we'd like to approach them in this order. First, I'd like Police Chief Scott Kimmer to respond to questions about crime and our general plan for providing police services. Next, we'd like to talk about financial services. Specifically, we'd like to address the kind of myriad questions about the Burke report. To that end, we have Jay Rogers, who's the principal analyst with Burke and Associates, and who responsible or central in preparing the report that you have in your packet. And finally, I'll address some of the miscellaneous issues that came up, including long-range capital needs, special districts, fire services, provision of social services. And of course, we'd be glad to answer any of the questions that you have at the conclusion of that. So unless there are any further issues, I'll begin by asking Chief Kimmerer to come up and talk with you.
My name is Scott Kimmerer. I'm the police chief of the city of Burien. I am also a 32-year member of the King County Sheriff's Office. And I wanted to give a little background as far as going through some of the statistics that you were asking about. I have been working in the North Highline Burien area for a better part of 16 years. I have been the police chief of the city of Burien for almost 9 years. For 8 of those years, we have been studying annexation in the North Highline area. I have done countless reviews, countless statistical analysis of both Burien and North Highline, comparing the two, comparing with Seattle, comparing crime in the entire region of King County. So I do have some background in dealing with the issues of how we look at crime, how we determine how we're going to address crime, and certainly being in Burien through a successful annexation of how we staff the police department appropriately to deal with the crime issues. So last night you did ask for some statistics. I did give you some. And last night's meeting I had, what I told you was 3 quarters worth of data, the first 3 quarters of 2011. What I want to bring today and what I provided to you was actually I got that last quarter's worth of information today. So I have the entire year of 2011, which is crime data for both North Highline and the city of Burien. As you know, the city of Burien in 2010 did an annexation. So this is really the first full year we've had to look at these crime statistics and use them as a benchmark. We annexed in after the first quarter of 2010, so it was very difficult for us to piece together how we were going to do that statistical analysis. We were able to do it for Burien. I did not do it for North Highline, but it gave us an idea of where we were going to start. So this is our first full year of getting information. I think that the information I'm going to give you also will give a little bit of maybe a forecast of North Highline area from the standpoint of the King County Sheriff's Office. As you know, the King County Sheriff's Office, all of King County, has gone through some pretty dramatic budget issues. In those budget issues, the King County Sheriff's Office was cut pretty dramatically over the past 3 years. Our staffing in North Highline has not been what it was before. And I think now, when I give you these statistics, it'll show that there has been somewhat of an increase in North Highline as far as crime goes. In my 9 years that I've been in Burien and looking at these comparisons between the two areas, up until about 2009, about this, the crime rates have been almost identical, with at many times North Highline having a lower crime rate than the city of Burien. It was just a perception out there that Burien or that North Highline had crime running rampant. That just flat wasn't the case. North Highline and Burien had very similar crime rates, and for the most part, looking at other suburban cities in the South End, we were fairly, we were in good shape. We were not the highest out there, pretty much middle of the road. So I'll give you some quick statistics on crime as it is right now in Burien and North Highline. I could make your head numb with statistics if you want. So I just want to do this quickly. If you have other questions, then feel free to ask me. The way we determine crime rates, because you have cities of different size and areas of different size, we go what's called a crime index. And it's very, very simple math. It is taking a crime or a series of crimes or all of what we call part 1 and part 2 crimes and dividing it by the population. That gives us the crime index. That way we can look at a city of Burien with a population of 48,000, a population in North Highline of 17.4 roughly, or the population of 612,000 in the city of Seattle, and come up with fairly comparable indexes of their crime rates because it's related to per thousand population. So what I'm going to give you are these crime indexes for Burien and North Highline for 2011. Part 1 crimes are the more serious crimes. They're felony crimes. They're the ones that generally are considered to be the ones that people are most concerned about in their community. And in this information I gave you, it does list out all the crimes. So the crime index for Burien would be 54. 54 per thousand for those listed as the Part 1 crimes. For North Highline, that same crime index is 65 per thousand. So not a huge differential, but it does, like I said, over the past number of years, Burien and North Highline have been very similar in their crime rate. This is, to me, an anomaly that I have not seen for some time. The Part 2 crimes are the ones that are more the areas of concern for the community. They could be vandalism, they could be liquor violations, they could be, family issues that are out there. So when you look at the Part 2 crimes, and again, there's a list there. For the city of Burien, the Part 2 crime index is 66 per thousand. When you look at the crime index for the North Highline area, it is 69 per thousand. So when you're talking about those crime rates, you're not talking about a big differential that way. Still maintaining kind of that similar feel of, if you have a feel for crime. But that's our business, is we kind of try to figure out where these crime indexes and what these crimes are, so we can address them, so we can focus in on them and develop strategies for them. The other thing that we do is we take the violent crimes, the crimes against persons, and the property crimes, and we break those out. And we do that just because, again, those are the most serious of the serious, and those are what people are generally asking about. And we use them as a comparison tool. It really doesn't say a whole lot, but it does let us say, okay, this area might need some more attention because there are more crimes against property, burglaries, auto thefts, things like that, or crimes against persons. So to break that down again, for the city of Burien, our crime index for violent crimes is 5. So 5 per thousand in a year period of time, that's what the crime index is. And that's, kind of looking at what likelihoods are as far as being a victim of violent crime. For the North Highline area, that number is 8. So again, a differential a little bit higher. Again, something that we had not seen if we look back over the years. For property crimes, again, very similar to both areas. Burien's is 36 per thousand, and North Highline's is 40 per thousand. So, and again, anytime you have questions regarding the stats, I'd be happy to answer them. One of the areas that came up, and that we were talking about again, is the effectiveness of our policing versus what Seattle had proposed in their policing model. What I can say about that is, I've been the chief for a long time in the city of Burien. I asked for my input, feedback, what kind of staffing do we need, how many officers do we need, how do we want to focus on crime, how do we want to deal with certain emerging trends. If you look at the city of Burien, both pre-annexation and post-annexation, which there was a considerable increase in staffing when we went to the new Burien of 48,000, and you look at our crime rates during that time, they stayed pretty much the same. They dropped a little bit, and then they just kind of leveled out a little bit. But when you're looking at the city of Seattle, who was proposing a great deal more resources to come in this area, Burien's crime rate was still lower than Seattle's in both counts, in all counts, in violent crime, in property crime, in total Part 1 crimes, total Part 2 crimes. So it's hard to say that throwing more police officers in an area is going to be effective. So when we talk about the staffing, what we want to do and what we have proposed for the North Highline area, all I can say is we've looked at the data, we've looked at the statistics, we have had a successful annexation already once. We are proposing a higher level of police service in the North Highline area that is currently being provided by the King County Sheriff's Office. Although the Sheriff's Office is still going to be here. I mean, when we did our annexation in North Highline, I took the officers that worked there and changed their uniforms and put them in a Burien uniform. So it's still people that have the knowledge, the ownership, the trust of the people here that are still going to work in the same area. When you talk about our police staffing and the questions come out about why we're not staffing to a level that Seattle's projecting, Seattle has a different method of deciding how they want to do police service. What I'm saying is we have demonstrated that our method of doing police service is very effective in this kind of suburban atmosphere that we're working in. The last thing I want to just leave with is last 2 years, the Burien Police Department, and I want to clarify, all the statistics that are done by the King County Sheriff's Office. They are not done by the Burien Police. The King County Sheriff's Office takes all the data. They're the ones that report to the federal government. They're the ones that prepare our statistical reports. So what you've got there that I've given you is done by the Sheriff's Office, not the City of Burien. The City of Burien, last 2 years, we responded to about 30,000 calls for service. We arrested about 3,000 people. We had reported 62 uses of force in the city of Burien that were filed. We had 1 citizen complaint in the last 2 years. So if we're talking about the effectiveness of our police department, I think that speaks volumes. That we are a police department that has very effective, very high quality people, that we are very conscientious of how we deal with our community. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Board have questions?
I was just looking, the report says you're planning on adding, I think, about 23 or 24 FTEs.
Yes, I think the total is 19 commissioned officers is what we're
And
at.
then how many more than the current King County staffing? I think that would be approximately.
Part of it is, and this is where it gets a little complicated in the contracting world, because there are FTEs, there are dedicated resources that Burien gets, but there are all kinds of peripheral benefits that we get by being part of the Sheriff's Office. So we add major crimes investigations. So if there's a homicide in the Burien, our detectives don't investigate it. The King County Sheriff's Office investigates. So those are added staff levels. I would say just for reactive patrol, we're adding probably 4 more than what's currently there. I think they have 2 people that are working there, which would be a total of 12 commissioned to work 2 districts full time.
So is it the case that your lower figures from the city of Seattle do not reflect things such as the peripheral services that you use from King County? Do you have a contract with King County for those peripheral services?
Yes. Yeah, we don't have our own SWAT team. We use the King County Sheriff's Office SWAT team. We do not have our own canine unit. We use the King County Sheriff's canine helicopter, major crimes investigations, child find, major accident reconstruction. The comm center is obviously through the Sheriff's Office. So
And
there's
they
a
have-
lot of staff that's not part of the dedicated FTEs that work in a Burien uniform.
So you have access to those services, but you don't pay the capital facilities cost for those services?
We do,
or
it's part of the
benefits?
contract.
Oh,
It
it's
is part of the contract. So they're built into the contract.
Uh-huh.
And it would, the way the contract is designed is there are dedicated services that Burien pays for that are wholly Burien services. Burien officers, Burien detectives, myself, a captain, a lot of them. Then there are others that are shared services. And that's part of, the Burkus and Associates studies is that was these economies of scale, the fact that I don't have to buy a whole detective for a major crimes investigation. I get to share that with the other contract cities, but I still have that resource available, and all the rest of them do too. So they are paid for. There's, the county cannot give away any services. They have to get compensated for them. But because of those economies of scale, they are a lower rate than if you were a municipal department.
And how do you find their availability? Are they there when you need them?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
You don't have to stand in line with other cities to use them.
No. And I think the greatest examples you would find are there was any kind of major incident that happened in a city, something, that we don't want to talk about, but a shooting or something like that, you will see somewhere in the neighborhood of 15 police officers there immediately. And I only have 4 that are working. So we get the response from CTAC, from Burien, from unincorporated. And this goes beyond, we have what's called mutual aid, which any department's going to respond to something. But we have those that will stay, that will help, that can do traffic control, that will help do witness statements. It will do a lot of the work that is necessary. We in turn do the same thing for the unincorporated area and CTAC. But, it is, this used to be just one big precinct out here for King County. And now it's divided up a little bit, but we still are the same department, the same officers, we're on the same radio frequency.
Other questions?
I have a question.
Several people have testified to their high approval of the storefront deputies.
Yes,
Would that remain the same?
absolutely. They took that officer from me working in Burien, DJ Meyer. I would love to have him back, but he would stay in that capacity.
He would still stay
He
in
would
that
stay.
same
The city of Burien does have one storefront already that we kept down in Boulevard Park when we annexed that part of that area. So that's very important to us.
You mentioned that there has been an increase in crime. I think several people have testified that they thought that there'd been increased crime in the annexation area, but you were surprised that it was in that area, not in the existing area, correct? I mean, that's what you.
Well, I was surprised that there was that differential. I mean, the differential is not huge.
Okay.
But there is a differential where normally we were about the same. But we took, half of what used to be North Highline into the city of Burien. And so it was something that I didn't expect. I thought we would expect similar.
Well, hopefully this is a fair question to you, but given your experience, can you speculate as to why that would be, that there'd be this increase that you were surprised?
Part of crime is cyclical, and it's very hard to predict how crime is going to turn out and what's going to happen from one year to another. And there have been years, I think crime as a whole in all the King County region has gone down. But there's really no way to predict how it's going to go. I can't tell you why that has happened. I do know that we are less staffed in the North Highline through the sheriff's office than we have been in the past. The storefront officer was something that the King County Council just recently approved to come back, and we were without a storefront officer for a considerable period of time. So I think that's a great, a great benefit and something that we should thank, King County for recognizing the value of that. But that, those could be reasons. The storefront officer just came in 2 months ago, maybe 2 months ago, and we hadn't had one for almost a year. It's that storefront officer, the impact that that person makes is incredible, and it's highly undervalued.
Any other questions?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next will be Jay Rogers with Burien Associates. I've asked Jay to tell you a little bit about his firm, just so you understand their credentials. I also wanted to mention that Burien Associates performed the financial analysis on our first annexation, and Burien Associates also did the analysis when we did a recent audit of the police department to determine their cost effectiveness. We were thinking about the possibility of starting our own municipal police department. And early last year, they completed an audit of the department. So they have a considerable amount of experience in this area. Okay.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you, members of the board, for having me out to clarify some of the questions that came up concerning the annexation before you today. Just a brief explanation. My name is Jay Rogers, 2025 First Avenue, Seattle, Washington. I'm an associate at Burke, which is a management and financial consultancy. We've been in business for about 20 years. We specialize in helping cities address complex financial issues such as annexation. We've helped jurisdictions in King County, Snohomish County, Pierce County, Kirkland. As Mike mentioned, we've helped the city of Burien with their prior annexation as well as the annexation before you today. We've worked with the city of Bothell, city of Marysville, city of Everett, just to give you a couple. So we are fairly well versed in the issues surrounding annexation. So now I'll go and I was given a list of questions, so I'll try to address the questions in order. If there's anything on this, feel free to clarify or ask again. So the first question had to deal with why is the report labeled draft? The report is final in nature and was submitted to the city for council review, which they moved forward to bring the proposal before you today. Again, nothing has changed with the analysis or the report, so it is considered final. Just does not say that, and so that was an oversight on our part. The second question, and I'm actually going to address the second question as well as the fourth question, which they sort of are interrelated. And the second question had to deal with what is a structural deficit, and is this unique to the city of Burien? So at first, this is not a unique issue for the city of Burien. This structural deficit is why we structured our annexation analysis, why Burke has structured his annexation analysis to not only analyze the fiscal implications of just the proposed annexation, but as the city but also to include the existing city to determine whether or not the existing city is better off, worse off, or if there's no impact regarding annexation. So you can't really look at it in two separate spheres. You have to sort of integrate it to understand really what is the full fiscal implication of annexation. And as the study shows, that we found that this particular annexation really doesn't change that fiscal dynamic of the existing city. I'd like to also point out that cities are required to balance their budget. So as part of that, most jurisdictions are now dealing with an economic recession, as well as a structural imbalance of the 1% imposed by the 1% limit on property tax revenues. So what what this does for cities is it makes their decisions to balance budget, it makes that process more difficult for cities to do because there are caps on the revenue sources as well as the economic recession. So the ability of them bringing those costs in line with the revenues, again, is more difficult. So the annexation, as it pertains to this, when a city addresses annexation and looks at whether or not it should move forward with annexation, it's useful to look at both, again, what is happening within the annexation area as well as what's in the existing city. So just to use the analysis that we've provided for the North Highline area, the annexation sales tax credit is in place for cities within the Puget Sound region to use to help offset the increase in costs and services associated to extend their level of service to the annexation area. That annexation sales tax credit is if the city is eligible, and there's certain criteria that the city has to meet in terms of population, as well as specific provisions that pertain to this annexation that allow the city to be eligible for up to $5 million per year for annexation sales tax credit. That sales tax credit sunsets after 10 years. So our analysis showed that within that year 1 through year 10, what that annexation sales tax credit does, it allows the city greater flexibility to address its fiscal challenges, both as it pertains to the annexation area, as well as it pertains to the existing city. I'd like to point out that after the annexation sales tax credit sunsets, so year 11, the analysis showed that the annexation area, the fiscal balance of the annexation area, does not make the fiscal challenges of the existing city any worse or any better. Basically a wash. As we showed, I think the margin only around 2% to the positive. So stated again that the marginal impact is roughly about 2% to the positive. It would not make, so if Burien were to move forward with this annexation, this area would not make it any more difficult. It would not pose any new challenges for the city that it would not already have to address within its existing framework of balancing costs and revenues.
Why?
Why? Well, given the existing tax basis, so what we ended up doing, and this is a purely financial exercise of looking at what costs are intended to grow within the city and how revenues are growing within the city. Looking at that based on current levels and what they would be both 10 years during the annexation sales tax credit years, as well as after that. We both looked at the city as well as the annexation area. So the revenues that are supporting the annexation area combined with the cost, once you combine those two, the difference, the deficit, the structural imbalance, the structural problem is no different in the city compared to the annexation area. You're dealing with basically the same issues. So it's a balance of costs are increasing much faster than revenues.
The deficits remain neutral, but what about the level of service?
The level of service would remain the same. As far as the level of service for the city would be extended into the annexation area. Those are the assumptions that were brought forward from the existing city to the annexation area. So that in order to figure out what the cost would be, we determined the level of service working with the city staff, what those costs would be if they were to extend their current levels of service within the existing boundaries of the city through the annexation.
So are you talking about the overall cost increase of 3.6 and the differential of the revenue only going at 1.8 and the half of that would be covered by the 5 million? Is that kind of, or? that overall cost model.
Right.
Okay.
Basically, the costs are increasing, like you said.
They're double. In other words, costs are going twice as fast as revenue.
Yes. And the fiscal problem that cities have to understand is how do they bring the revenues and the costs in balance. So I guess to pose it a different way, that these challenges of balancing the costs and revenues are no different in the city than they would be in the annexation area. So by annexing this area, it doesn't introduce any new challenges for the city to address that it wouldn't already have to address with its existing city. Yeah. There were some questions in regards to the financial assumptions that were used in the study. So I just wanted to go over briefly what we used for the study. So the assumptions are based on historical trends regarding the levels of development within the city and the annexation area, and also how those levels of development would change the underlying tax base within both of those areas. However, moving forward from today, looking into the future, adjustments were made to historical trends to recognize the recessions that occurred in the area. Those include dampening down the levels of development, taxable retail sales, rates of increases in assessed valuation, as well as real estate turnover. As well as the baseline historical trend that was used for the annexation area. Actually, for the analysis was to start at 50% of historical trends. So that's just to give you a sense of the conservative approach that we were taking with the analysis to recognize the current economy that we're in, as well as what might occur in the future. And now I know there were some questions on why we had determined maybe 2016 as being the year in which levels would return to their more historical norms. And we use that, because we've used that in prior analyses, using economic forecasts that are out there to determine that that's a likely scenario. Whether or not that actually occurs, we did some analysis based on council questions during the process of review with the city council to look at, well, what would happen if it was delayed 3, 4, 5 more years, and how would that change the fiscal picture? And what we ended up finding is it actually didn't change the picture. So if development slowed down, then that if the recovery took till 2018 or 2020, it still didn't change that underlying answer that the annexation area didn't really marginally change the fiscal challenges that the city faced. And that's just because, like we stated previously today, that there is just not a lot of activity going on where the levels are already built out. There was a question specifically in regards to the recent drop in AV within the area. The analysis was based on the current data that we had, which was the 2010 assessed values for 2011 taxes. Obviously now there are 2011 values out there for 2012 taxes, and those appear to be lower than the 2010 values. It's unclear what AV will be actually once the city is able to decide on an effective date of annexation. There may be a full return of assessed valuation. Our analysis shows, as I stated before, that even in periods of slower growth, the experiences of the city, as well as the annexation area, wouldn't change the underlying findings of the analysis. And then I wanted to just highlight, in addition to that, just 2 specific areas. If you look in the report on page ES6, you'll notice in years 1 through 10, that $5 million of annexation sales tax credit that I alluded to in that bar chart, you can notice that the dotted line shows that maximum amount that the city would be eligible for. And our analysis showed that in each of those years, during the annexation sales tax credit years. The city never reached that maximum credit. So if revenues were to come in less than expected, or costs were to increase faster than expected, there's still a little bit of added insurance there for the city to be able to handle that issue between years 1 and 10. Whether or not that changes the underlying, beyond year 11, it doesn't appear that it would marginally change the analysis on it. So there was a question in terms of a reference to Burien having debt in the report, and I don't believe that there was any reference in the report regarding debt. And I know that the city, if Kim can corroborate this, that they do not have any current floating debt. So just wanted to make that point clear. There was a question in regards to why the swim utility was omitted from the analysis. And with the annexation, especially when we deal with enterprise funds, the general assumption is that increases in costs associated with annexation would typically be met with increases in rates because the enterprise fund would increase its rates, thus recovering whatever policies that they have behind usually full cost recovery for that enterprise fund. So stated another way, any increases in costs would be offset by rates.
Deficits to structure
Are you talking about
in the annexation area.
specific like capital costs? So capital is a separate analysis than what we're doing and what I've been speaking about thus far. What I've been speaking about is specific to operations. As far as capital, existing capital needs within the annexation area would be incorporated into the city's capital improvement project list. Those aren't mandated things that need to be done. The city, like any of its capital programs, would evaluate potential projects, and then we move them up or down on the list depending on priority and needs, as well as funding.
Is that true also with transportation?
Usually, transportation, yeah, it would work the same way.
So let me see if I understand correctly. Capital needs are not reflected. Not reflected.
Capital needs are not reflected in the analysis of the balance of whether or not current expenditures match, or whether expenditures in the annexation area, the fiscal balance of the annexation area compared to the existing. They are discussed, but it's more of a high-level summary explanation of how capital projects are typically handled, as well as a brief analysis of what those potential costs would be based on existing, I think they're covered. 4.3 on page 26. So as you can see, we've highlighted an estimated 5-year need of about 46.4 million. So whether or not that changes over time, I don't know, it changes year over year. So but what I said about how it would be incorporated to the city's current CIP, it would be incorporated to that, and then the city would handle it like any other normal capital program. And that is,
Those capital facilities are from the city general fund.
well, some are funded through but some are funded through grant programs, federal funds, things like that. So it's unclear, and that's what I was alluding to on how projects either move up or down the priority list of when cities determine the need of a particular project.
And ostensibly, those will be prioritized to be done to the same level of service as in the existing city.
Yes.
I have a question on It goes.
If the rates didn't change,
Are the
the
rates,
cost-
are the rates going to, I mean, are the rates going to remain the same, or are they going to be reduced?
Hi, Kim Kraus, Finance Director for the City of Burien, 400 Southwest 152nd Street, Burien, Washington. King County's rates and Burien's rates are very similar for stormwater. King County is $133 per residential unit. City of Burien is $120 per residential unit. That's annually. King County has a little bit different method of raising their rates than the City of Burien does. We try to raise our rates annually. I think they raise their rates every 3 years. So they should normalize within a couple of years.
Thank you.
So, I have a question while we're on the subject of raising rates. The city's tax and fee revenue sources, I was just looking at that operating revenue analysis chart. And could you tell us a little bit more about the assumed future tax and fee structure and how you arrived at some of these numbers? I'm just looking at I saw that the 2011 numbers are the current city budget estimates, so don't include the annexation, and then from there you went with the inclusion numbers. And I'm trying to understand how the calculation works with that. Because I'm just trying to understand if in certain scenarios, whether there was no growth, less growth, more growth, and if these numbers are considered conservative by whatever means you use to arrive at. These revenues reflect the city's existing policy regarding taxes. So there's no alteration or assumption placed on changes to tax policies. What they do reflect is changes to the tax basis for that drive those revenues. So as I alluded to, the delay or the dampening to reflect the current economic recession, those factors have been applied to, for example, sales tax are based on your taxable retail sales. So those have been adjusted to reflect adjusted factors for the recession. And is that in each instance? Because I noticed that you said that in property, certainly, that you had factored in through 2016. I'm just looking at also as far as some of the other, if there are any other, it would apply to, the sales tax, the regular property tax, things like utility taxes, some of the other taxes are on a more per capita basis on how we've gone through the estimate. So there's been no real adjustment, but what we have done is gone through and applied no inflationary taxes on those particular things. Okay. Thank you.
Do you have anything else you'd like to add? We don't need to interrupt you. We're on the floor there.
No, thank you very much.
Does the board have any additional questions? I have one. At the time you wrote the report, it was a possibility that the sales tax credit was going to go away. Why did you not analyze that as part of your worst case scenario?
I think we weren't directed to analyze that particular scenario because, it's not known exactly what will occur during this legislative session. I know that there are proposals out there that could eliminate the credit or reduce it. As you can see in the graph that we proposed, there is a fair amount of buffer room or insurance room that the city has in terms of using that minimization sales tax credit. I mean, they never hit that $5 million cap.
I have one question. I don't know, maybe it takes a lawyer to answer this, but if the state allows the sales tax credit, is that a contract for 10 years, or could they change my next year and do away with it, or in 2 years?
Great question. The answer is that the statute is as the statute is currently written, there is no reason why the state couldn't in the future withdraw that sales tax credit. And in answer to the first question, we learned in November that the state was considering diminishing the sales tax credit and reducing the future sales tax credit. When this analysis was done, that wasn't even a consideration. It hadn't been discussed, and we had no reason to believe that it wasn't a consideration.
And am I correct in remembering that yesterday you testified saying that if the sales tax credit goes through, that you have serious doubts about whether council will go ahead with the annex?
Yeah, if the sales tax, the $5 million sales tax credit is revoked, then there is no way that I personally would never recommend it, and I'm sure my council would never go forward with it. So a lot hinges on that sales tax credit. If it's not present, that's kind of the end of the story. The board had some other kind of miscellaneous questions, and it's late. Thank you for waiting for my testimony until the last minute, and everybody's sore from sitting on the seats. I'm going to try not to be redundant here, and I'll go quickly, and I won't dwell on things that I don't think we have any longer interesting. I wanted to touch, though, on the question of the fire districts. I started to go into that a little bit last night, and I'm sorry, I probably should have done that. I had spoken yesterday with the chief of Fire District 2, who is also the acting chief of Fire District 11. Fire District 11 had sent a letter saying that they were concerned about how the sliver on the river would be protected, 165 acres, give or take. The chief said, not speaking for the commission, he made that very clear, as Liz did, speaking for her commission, that he felt that was a surmountable issue. The departments are working very closely together now. He didn't see that as being so material as to be insurmountable. I don't know how to quantify that for you in any other way, but he led me to believe that it was something that could be worked out in plain language. So there's that. And also, the city of Seattle sent you a letter having to do with the left one liability. That really is a matter of law. Law says how that is going to be managed, and I love that they wanted to get that on the record. But we have our city attorney with us, and Craig, is there anything you want to quickly say better what I just said?
Well, Craig Knudsen, the city attorney for Burien, 400 Southwest 157. Thank you for the opportunity to address this issue briefly. I read the letter that was submitted by the Fire District 11 attorney, as I assume you have or will. The city's concern with that primarily is his request that you condition this annexation on pre-annexation agreements being entered into. As the city manager has expressed, the city very much supports the entering into of agreements between whatever parties need to agree to participate in how to deal with those remaining areas. But we will do what we can to make sure that happens. But we don't think it's appropriate to condition an annexation on that type of requirement. Your legal counsel can advise you on what your authority is better than I can, but as I read the statutes, your authority is to approve the annexation, to disapprove the annexation, or to modify the boundaries. And it may be that county review boards have put conditions on annexations before. I'm not aware of that. I did see a previous agreement a previous annexation resolution of this board involving the city of Renton's Fairwood annexation, where there was an issue about fire district agreement being entered into to deal not only with fire service in the annexed area, but also remaining areas outside. And the way I read your decision, you did not require that type of agreement as a condition. You relied on the city's commitment to make sure that that would happen. And I would also point out that the date of the letter that you received is December 23rd, 2011, which is pretty late in the game to be bringing this type of requirement into the picture. The city council did have a number of meetings, public meetings dealing with this annexation. One of the meetings was specifically devoted to special districts. Both fire districts attended that meeting. They did not mention the need to condition the annexation like this. So again, with all due respect to the districts, we realize that this is a very important issue, but we would ask that you not place a condition requiring it, but rather that you enter a finding that it is something that does need to be addressed, and the parties have presented evidence that it will be. Even the King County representative tonight referred to the fact that the parties have a history of being able to successfully negotiate this type of issue. Thank you.
If I can ask you one question, is there anything in statute that requires those items or issues to be resolved before this board could approve a proposal?
I'm not aware of that, but I'm glad you asked that question because I forgot to mention one thing that kind of relates to that question that was in the fire district attorney's letter. If you look at page 3 near the top, his fourth item as to what the statutes do provide for dealing with this issue, he says, the Board of Commissioners of North Highline may submit to the voters of the district a proposition to require District 2 to provide protection to the remainder of the district, provided that the remaining areas of North Highline pay for such service. So the way I read that, what he's saying is that if they're not able to negotiate something with the other district or the city of Seattle or whoever, they could put a proposition to their own voters that would require the District 2 to take over the area, and then the residents of the district would have to pay whatever the fire district 2 would charge for that service. So it seems to me that that is a fallback or a safeguard in case that would preclude the need to place a condition.
If you can clarify that, sir, so the North Highline District is going to be dissolved, it'll be merged into two.
No. For this particular, for the annexed area, Fire District 2 will take over, but Fire District 11 will not dissolve as an entity.
Even though it's probably not a viable, by their letter, it's not a
There's
viable.
I'm sorry.
According to their letter, it's not a
There's
viable.
195 acres left that will be left in the district.
But it's a revenue stream of only 173,000.
Right.
You put gas in the tank of it, right?
That's why there needs to be an agreement. We agree with that. There needs to be an agreement, or Fire District 2 needs to take it over, and the people in the district would pay rates to the district to compensate for that service.
The typical way that would be handled would be through contract. Fire District 11 would contract with District 2 to take over that remaining small number of acreage and to report the property tax to support that. And that's what we would expect to happen in this case. Is the board satisfied with the question of the long-range capital planning? If so, I'll skip over that. Likewise, the question of property taxes and utility taxes. We established that property taxes, utility taxes were very similar in both areas. That was the question for the board. I'm trying to do this quickly for you. Special districts, I wanted to respond. The question was what changes are practical matter with special districts? Very little. Water and sewer special districts are not affected by this, nor by our proposed annexation, nor is the Highline School District. Their boundaries remain the same and continue to function the same. So no difference in the delivery of water, sewer, and school. And I think that answers all of the questions that the board asked. I do have a very brief rebuttal on this late, and I'll be brief. Are there any other questions that the board would like to ask me or any other member of the team? Thank you. Very briefly, I began my remarks yesterday by pointing out that this was an extraordinarily divisive emotional issue for a very young city to take on. I think you've seen evidence of that here in the last couple of nights. I want to paint a picture for you of a very responsible government. I'm hoping that the testimony that you heard, particularly this evening, describes a very thoughtful process, one that wasn't entered into precipitously, one that was entered into by many people who care a great deal about the existing city of Burien, including myself and my council, and who care about the potential future residents that we may absorb. The process that we used to create the plan that you have seen before you, and the plan is in the book report, was exactly the same as the process that we used for the first annexation. We looked at how we provide services in our city. I sat down with my leadership team and said, extrapolate those services into an annexation area. We gave that information to Burien Associates. We collaborated with them around cost. We looked at the revenue streams. We compared the two. And we did what we considered to be an objective, clear-headed, professional analysis of those things. We heard people that disagreed with that. I don't know exactly how to respond to some of those criticisms, but I hope that you're persuaded that we did do exactly that. I would further point out that the first annexation that we appeared before you in 2008 with the identical sorts of analysis. You heard some of the identical objections at that time. In April of this year, the council, I believe it was April, my council said, how did we do? That was the 1-year anniversary of that annexation. Tell us how we did compared to the pro forma that you presented to us when we annexed. April 1st, 2009 was when 2010 was when the annexation became effective. So we had 1 year's worth of data. We outperformed our pro forma in every category. So in other words, I'm trying to, again, paint a picture to you of a conservative analysis that was responsible, identical to one that's already proven itself. So with that, I'd also like to add that this has caused my own council has, there are differing opinions on my own council, there are differing opinions in my own city. You heard it. This has been a very difficult question or issue for us to consider, and yet my council, elected by the people of Burien, has come to the conclusion that our existing city would be well served to advance this annexation. Not only would our residents or the existing city be well served, but that we would do a good job in serving the future residents of the North Highline area. So I'll leave it there. If there are any other questions, we'd be glad to try to address them for you. If not, let us know.
No questions from the board? Mr. Martin, city staff, we appreciate the work that you put in for a short amount of time. Gave you questions last night, and we felt that you've done a lot of work. Chief Plummer's analysis was very well put together as well. We appreciate the work that the rest of the public has done, the fact that you've stayed here to the very bitter end with us, because we now have about 10 to 15 minutes, maybe half an hour most, to get ourselves out of the room due to our rental agreements. And because of the voluminous nature of the material that we've been given, I'd like to propose to the board that we do not enter into deliberations at this time, but that we put the deliberations off to a regular meeting on the 23rd of January at 7 o'clock.
Technically, need a special meeting. It's just not at our standard time.
Yes, it would be.
And I'm suggesting that we close the public hearing at this time so that we take no more information written or oral.
Make a motion to close the meeting. Public comment.
Second? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The public hearing is closed, and we will then continue our deliberations in a special meeting on January 23rd, 7 p.m. and time and place, or time or place to be announced.
The place will be announced, it will be up on the website, and it will be available if you phone the office.
At that time, at that special meeting, we will take no more public testimony. We will have no time for public comment. It will just be deliberations of the board. You are definitely welcome to come. And our executive secretary assures us that we will get a room that will be big enough to have you comfortably seated.
I'd just like to say on behalf of this side of the board that we do a lot, we've done a lot of these hearings. I know myself personally have done a lot, as well as other members here for a number of years. And what I like to tell people is that the difference, the opposite of agreement in these cases isn't disagreement. The opposite of agreement is actually apathy. And I'm just so glad you guys came out tonight and in the previous nights, because the worst thing that could happen is no one came. The disagreement, that's wonderful, because that's actually a discussion. If no one came, then I'd be really concerned. So, thank you.